Hi everybody, this is Devin, aka Gear 3D, and today I'm going to be showing you how to assemble the cabinet mount of the Forbidden Spool Holder, which is the modular spool holder system I've designed. So the parts you're going to need are your printed parts, which you are going to use the bill of materials Google Sheets to figure out which parts you need, since you might not be building the cabinet mount. But don't worry, if you're building an extrusion mount, they assemble very similarly to the cabinet mount with their three pieces, so you should be able to figure that out. And for hardware, also I would recommend using the bill of materials to figure that out. I will be telling you where each piece of hardware goes as the process goes along, but consult the bill of materials so you know what you need. I ended up buying just a pack of nylox and a big thing of M3 bolts from Amazon to help me with this project and future projects. Tools you're going to need is a file to clean up some parts. You can see I've already cleaned up parts since there's blue powder on it. Parts you're probably going to need to clean up are the slot of the middle section of the cabinet mount and the intersections of the axle arm in here, as well as these back corners of the other two pieces of the cabinet mount. This is just from warping for the axle arm and those two parts. This is just from the bumps add more friction, which isn't really great. You're also going to need two Allen keys. One is the 2.5mm Allen key. That's what you're going to be using for screwing in all the bolts. And a 4mm Allen key. This I am purely using to aid in the process of putting the nut into the filament axle. If you have a punch, I would recommend that you use a punch instead, since that will, well, that's what it's used for. I also have a piece of brass to help with putting the nut in place and a ruler for measuring out my PTFE tubing, and of course I have PTFE tubing from Capricorn, since I really like the tubing, and I also have the PTFE tube cutter. I would also recommend making sure all of your holes are correctly cleaned out. I used a screw and just started it in until it chewed all the plastic away, but you can also use a drill because that might be faster. So I was just wanting to check that this was cleaned out, because the holes you're most likely are going to need to clean out is the top of the filament axle. You might need to clean out the bottom of this, of the axle arm, depending on how that goes, and the hole that the knob goes into. You're also going to need to clean out the three holes for this part of the cabinet mount. All the other ones should be okay, at least in the past two that I've just gone through to clean out, they've been okay. So what I'm going to start with first, also in a Sharpie for measuring the PTFE tubing. So what I'm going to start with first is measuring and cutting my PTFE tubing and installing that. So I'm just going to straighten my PTFE tubing, and I'm going to mark it at 100 millimeters. And I'm going to cut it in the middle of my mark since I'm using Sharpie. I'm going to do that twice. So I'm going to put my extra PTFE tubing and the PTFE tubing cutter off to the side since we don't need that anymore. And now what you're going to do is you're going to line the PTFE tubing up with the end of the slot towards the nub. And you're just going to, for the curved one, I've lined the curve up, the curve of the PTFE tube up with the curve of the filament axle, since that kind of makes it want to stay in there more, or it is more likely to want to stay in there. And you just want to run your finger along it until it all goes in the slot all nice. So as you can see, the PTFE tubing is in line with the slot. You might notice that there's a gap here, and that's just purely because the filament spool will never touch there, so there is no need for there to be PTFE tubing. But if you want to fill that gap, you should cut a 105mm length of PTFE tubing. So I'm just going to do this for the other slot. And now we have our PTFE tubing installed. PTFE tubing is also optional. This is just to allow your spool to rotate with less friction. That's also what the design of the curve is. There's also a non-curved option. So the next thing we are going to do to finish the assembly of the filament axle is you're going to take whichever nut you choose to use in here and line it up with the shape. And just press it in with either a mallet or a hard surface. I'm starting mine with the hard surface of this cutting board I'm using, and then I'm going to use my piece of brass to hammer it in all the way. Sorry for the camera shaking, my camera's mounted to my desk. But so you can see now that the nylock, well for me, nylock is now seated flush with the top of the surface. So now is when you're going to take your 4mm Allen key or your punch, and you're going to use, well for me I'm going to use my brass block again, and you're going to hit this until the nut is seated, and we're going to make sure it's seated later by using a bolt. So I'm going to do this real quick, and sorry the camera's going to be shaking again. Okay, my nut won't move any farther, but as you can see, my nut is down there. So now I'm going to grab our M3 by 40mm bolt, and you can see that it is sticking out a bit, which is a good sign of the nut being in place. So I'm just going to screw in to make sure that the nut is fully seated, which I think it might be because of the brass block. Yeah, I can't really tighten that much more, or I'm kind of afraid that I'm going to be pushing plastic out of the way. If needed, I will fix this again later, but for now I'm going to call this part done. I'm just going to unscrew this so we can attach it later. Okay. So we have that all assembled. Next, I'm going to assemble the actual cabinet mount part. So what you're going to do for this is you just take your... Oh, another good thing for the ruler is to make sure you can measure your bolts. So this is our M3 by 25. We need our M3 by 25 and then our two M3 by 30 millimeter bolts for the actual cabinet mount themselves. And then, cool. So these are the bolts that we're going to need. I'm going to put them in this little channel of the cutting board I'm using. I'm actually going to end up using, I think, the M3 by 20 to help me put the nuts into this. So you're going to just take your nut and line it up with the hole. You can actually first put your bolt through. Screw your nut in, line it up, and just tighten it. And you want to keep tightening it until the nut is fully seated. And you will know when it's fully seated once you hit or get hit with a bunch of resistance as you are turning your Allen key. Okay, so now I'm going to turn the camera off real quick and do the other two, and I will be right back. Okay, so as you can see, I have inserted all three of my nuts for this part of the project. So what you're going to do is you're going to take the middle part of the cabinet mount and line it up, and then grab the other part of the cabinet mount to make a sandwich. If you want, you can use glue for this step, but I just made it so you could disassemble it if a part wears out in the future. So what I recommend doing is putting the screws in the two outer spots first and then putting the middle one in, since that allows things to fit nicer. So you're going to take your M3 by 25 and put that in the front hole. I'm actually going to line things up this way. And you're going to take M3 by 30 and put it in the back. The reason why I recommend doing it this way is because it can help you with counteracting part warp, which does tend to happen with these two parts, especially if you print it in ABS like I did. So what I'm just going to do is make sure the two ends of the bolt are sticking out of the part, so when I put the other side on with the nuts, when I screw them in, they will grab. So you just want to screw these in until they are completely tightened. Having a little bit of trouble getting the back to line up, but it finally did. Oops. And I'm having butterfingers with the Allen key today. And you should just fully tighten this. Or you should just fully tighten both of these. Until they're tight, and then you add your last M3x30 in the middle, and if it's tight, you can just use the hex key to help you thread it into place. It should find its way. And then when you tighten it down, it will help bring the bottoms together. And again, just doing it in this order just helps with warping of parts. Since these parts tend to warp, I've tried to make it so they don't warp. Well, they tend to warp when printing in ABS, which is what I've printed in to prevent any plastic melting or deforming when I print with ABS, since I heat my enclosure. And there we are. Our thing's done. If you would like, you could use an M3x30 here as well. You will just have part of the bolt sticking out. But if you would like to use different or less types of bolt, that is an option. So next we're going to set up the axle arm. So what we are going to do first is we are going to get 2 of our nuts, and we are going to line them up in these inner channels. There is you'll be able to see this more when you look at your part, but the top hole on each side has a nut hole on the back. Actually, wait, before I line the nut up, what I would recommend first is taking your M3x10s and putting them into place on either side. Oh, I also forgot to mention you will need pliers, because it just makes it easier to hold the nut in place when you are putting the bolt in. So what you kind of want to do is hold the Allen key, or hold the bolt with your Allen key, and hold the nut with your pliers. And you just want to catch the nut with the bolt, and then you can hold it in place to tighten the bolt, and then pull your nut into the hole like we did before with the cabinet mount. And once again, you're just going to continue tightening until the nut is fully seated, and then you are going to unscrew it, not completely, just until the end of the bolt is flush. So I'm going to turn the camera off again and do the other side, and I will be right back. Okay, so now that that's done, what we are going to do is assemble the knob mechanism, which is what allows the spool holder to be in its 2 different positions. If you are only building an extrusion mount, you will not need the knob assembly, but other than that, you will. So what you're going to need for this is your pen spring, a nylock. This is the one spot where the nylock is absolutely mandatory, because the pin or the knob can rotate, which could loosen it, and you need to keep your tension semi-precise, like it's not too big of a deal, but you don't want it loosening because it could mess with your tension, and then your spool holder will not be able to hold in the 90-degree position. So to do this, first we are going to once again line up our nylock. We're going to do this like we did the filament axle. We are going to line it up with the hex part, or the hex indent, and you're just going to press it into place. Right, not into place, but just get it seated a little bit. I'm doing really bad at this today. Actually, what you can do that would be even better is if you just use your bolt, your M3x20 bolt instead, and just line that up. Because then you can use your Allen key to tighten it, and it should pull the nut in place. Just make sure it is fully seated. Otherwise, your bolt will not grab when you attach it to the arm. So now I'm just going to tighten, since I've got it lined up and flush with the part. You're just going to tighten until the nylock is fully in place. And the nice thing about this part is, since it is a knob, you can hold onto it a little bit easier than some parts. Mine is giving me a little bit of trouble, so I will just gonna have to push through. Okay, I'm actually going to be right back once I get this seated, since you don't need to sit here and watch me mess around with this. So something I actually forgot to mention is, for the pulling of the nuts into place, something you can do is you can put a little washer on the end of your bolt for when you're doing this, so that it doesn't move too much plastic, because on my knob it is moving a lot of plastic. I might actually need to reprint this knob, but it's okay. I do have a spare next to me if necessary. But I'm going to work on this, and then I will be right back. I just wanted to give you that little tip. Okay, something I do want to bring up, just since it helped me with this, is what I did is I had part of my screw sticking out the other side of the knob like this. Or, well, let me tighten it down a little bit so I can show you better. So like I had it sticking up, and then I put it on my vise like this just so it would hold it, and I would hit it with the brass to help it get in. So if you have troubles getting your nylock in, you can also utilize this. But I believe my nylock is fully seated, so I'm going to put these off to the side and unscrew this real quick so we can move on to assembling the other parts. Or, well, not the other parts, the last part. Or not the last part of the knob assembly. So you can see the top of my knob got a little messed up, but it's okay. The length of the knob is not actually that important, so it doesn't matter at all. So what you are going to do to assemble the pin mechanism is you are going to take your M3x20 screw you're going to put your pen spring on the end of the screw like this, and then you are going to put it in this hole and line it up with the hole on the other side like this. You're going to take your Allen key and push it in. This is the hole that is really important to make sure it is clean, and it does not seem like mine is. Look real quick. Okay, there we go. So now you're just going to line that up, take your Allen key, push this in. Okay, if it threads in the plastic, it might just thread in the plastic, but there we go. Now I got it to go. So you're going to press it out like this. You're going to take your knob and you are going to screw it on. And you are going to tighten this until about half of the head of the bolt is sticking out from the body of the axle arm. It is really important that this hole is clean so that this functions properly, since you are going to be using this knob a lot. Okay, and to make sure that your knob is put in correctly, well, actually, I'll get back to that in a second, so our last part of this assembly to put together is the filament axle. So let me just bring the camera back down. So now you're going to finally use your M3x40. You're going to stick it through into this hole. My hole is a little bit tight for this, so I think I'm going to just have to use my Allen wrench to convince it to go in. I'll be right back when I get this in, because you don't need to watch me struggle with this. Okay, so what happened was I did not heed my own advice, and this hole wasn't properly cleaned out. So what you're just going to do is you're going to line up the two holes, and you can kind of tell if your nylock is in the right position if the head of your bolt is above the fully seated position. So we are just going to screw this in. Again with the Allen key butterfingers. So you're going to just tighten it up a little bit. With the nylock, if you move it, it'll loosen to enough and it won't loosen further. Like, it'll loosen enough so that you can rotate this, which is the reason why I use the nylock, so that you can put this on top of your printer if you, well, once conventions open up again. If you have an extrusion mount or a Prussian mount, you can stick this on there and use this as a spool holder for travel. So, to make sure that your knob works, what you're first going to do is you're going to pull the knob back and seat this in here, and you're going to line up the hole in the knob with the bolt of the axle arm. You can kind of see it, but you're going to stick your Allen key in and you are going to tighten this completely. You are going to do the same thing on the other side. You don't need to over tighten this. Like, once it's snug, that's fine, because these shouldn't really rotate. I mean, like, don't leave it enough, loosen it enough so that it's loose. Like, just make sure it's tight, but you don't need to worry about over tightening it, because they just run in a slot on either side. So to make sure that your knob is tight enough, you want to pull it out, bring it up into the locked position, not sure why my knob is not engaging actually, so... Oh, it's probably because this hole is probably too tight. I'm going to be right back. I will clean out this hole so that I can properly show you this. Again, make sure your holes are cleaned out. I will be right back. Okay, so actually my problem was not the hole not being cleaned out. I think my pin was too tight so that not enough of the head of the bolt was sticking out. So I'm going to unscrew this a little bit more and we can try this again. Because my pin is, this is pretty loose. So let me just once again assemble this. And you're going to pull your pin out. I would also recommend putting some oil on this track. If it's tight, I'm probably going to do that anyway because this one's a little tight. But your pin should be clicking into place. I think I actually might have a print defect on the arm that is preventing me from doing this. But essentially, you'll know when your knob is in place when you bring it into the 90-degree position. It locks, and the arm does not fall like mine's doing. I think this part might just be too warped, but once it does not collapse under the weight of filament, your spool holder is complete, and then you can just add your mounting hardware, whether it be one second, let me just really quick consult my BOM so I can properly say the type of screws. Either a number 8 screw or an M4 wood screw. You could also use bolts, but whatever hardware of your choice for mounting. Thank you for watching, and thank you for being interested in the Forbidden Spool Holders. Sorry that the arm didn't really work out, because it would be nice to properly show you that, but thanks so much for watching.